Hello and welcome to Artful Moments. Thank you so much for taking time for yourself today, especially right before the Thanksgiving holidays. If this is your first Artful Moments, welcome, welcome, welcome. These are 15-minute art encounters on Friday afternoons hosted by the Center for Performing Arts Medicine. It gives you the opportunity to unwind, learn something new, and maybe have some fun. And today I think we're totally going to do all three of those. Was inspired today by the idea of holiday traditions, right? So Thanksgiving sometimes feel like it starts the kickoff of event after event after event. And for so many people, there are traditions on Thanksgiving that you would never let go of. So think in your own mind what those traditions might be, whether it's running a turkey trot, whether it's making grandma's mashed potatoes, whether it's having the same roll recipe every year or watching your favorite football game on after your meal. There's so many Thanksgiving traditions. And today we are going to talk about one very specific one. So let me share my screen. And here we go. So Charlie Brown Thanksgiving. So when you thought about traditions, maybe you thought about Charlie Brown Thanksgiving. This would be popular, right? The Peanuts started in 1950, but Charlie Brown Thanksgiving didn't arrive on the scene until 1973. When it was broadcast, it was the 10th primetime animated television special based just on the Peanut characters, all done by Charles Schulz. And except for a few years in the 1980s, this Charlie Brown Thanksgiving was aired every single year. There's a big kerfluffle in 2020 when Apple TV acquired the rights to this holiday tradition, and they had to make it available for free for X amount of days per year, just because people can't have their Thanksgiving without their Charlie Brown. So if you've never seen Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, don't worry about it. It's short, it's brief. I would love for you to be able to watch it with your family or your friends or whoever you're gathering with this Thanksgiving. I'll give you a little bit of kind of a preview of it, right? So Charlie Brown, in the opening scene, we see Charlie Brown and Lucy. Lucy entices Charlie Brown over to kick her football, and calling it a Thanksgiving tradition, excuse me. He's a little skeptical, but says, okay, maybe I'll go along with it. And just as usual, she pulls that ball away, stating some traditions fade away. So when we move a little bit forward in the film, I like to think of it as kind of a Thanksgiving disaster, right? So without further ado, I'm going to show you the first minute or so of what happens. And I want you to think about, from what you're watching today, what do you think the plot might be from this?
Hello?
Hi, Chuck. This is Peppermint Patty. How you been, Chuck?
Okay, I guess.
Do you kind of miss me, Chuck?
Well,
That's okay, Chuck. I know you probably can't talk because someone's listening. We'll keep these intimate things to ourselves, okay, Chuck?
Well,
Listen, I really have a treat for you. My dad's been called out of town. He said I could go over to your house and share Thanksgiving with you, Chuck.
Well,
I don't mind inviting myself over because I know you kind of like me, Chuck.
Well,
Okay, that's a date. See you soon, you sly devil.
Oh, brother. Now what? Peppermint Patty's coming to Thanksgiving dinner. We won't even be home. Hello?
Hi, Chuck. Listen, I have even greater news. Remember that great kid, Marcy?
Sure.
I just talked to her and she kind of would like to see you again. And her folks said it would be okay if she joined us. So you can count on 2 for dinner, Chuck.
But I just don't know.
This will be okay with your folks, won't it, Chuck?
Well, the problem is...
Don't worry. We won't make any problems. We'll help clean up the dishes and everything. Just save me a drumstick in the neck. Okay, Chuck? See you, Chuck.
So I'm going to end it there. because I can feel my own blood pressure rising, right? Anyone who's hosted a big gathering, you wake up the morning of the event and you think of, okay, I gotta set the table, I gotta make the food, I've already purchased all the ingredients, I have a timeline, all these different things, and you wake up and it would be a worse nightmare to have guests and guests and guests, or maybe you weren't even planning to host, just like Charlie Brown here. You had no intention of hosting, and then all of a sudden your gathering goes from being a gathering of zero to a gathering of many, many, many. I love this kind of little vignette because Charlie Brown is just such a sweet character, and he accepts it. He's like, okay, a peppermint patty, okay, Marcia, and all these people come. And meanwhile, other than being a child, right, he's completely unprepared to host Thanksgiving. Him and Snoopy, which if you're new to the Peanuts, Snoopy is a dog, carry on. They make this meal where they butter pieces of toast together. They have some pretzel sticks. They throw a handful of popcorn out there and maybe a few jelly beans and call it a Thanksgiving feast. So if you've ever had a Thanksgiving that, whether it was the food or the company or maybe a combination of all of the above that kind of go wrong, believe me, it happens to the best of us. It happens to Charlie Brown himself. So,
How do I help?
speaking of kind of what happens in that first scene, I also like to think of this evolution of Charlie Brown, right? It reminds me so much of the evolution of yourself sitting at this Thanksgiving table. Whether you feel like you're the same person from last year or 5 years or 10 years or 20 years ago, or whether that you've changed in the way that you interact, maybe the table around you, the guests around you, what traditions you're following and what traditions you want to carry forward in the future. Looking at the evolution of Charlie Brown, I think is a fun way to also look internally at the evolution of ourselves. Um, Charles Schulz is the mastermind behind the Peanuts characters. And he talked a lot about how Charlie Brown developed over time. You see on the screen his physical appearance, but even beyond the physical appearance, how Charlie Brown's attitude and the way that he interacted with the world and those around him really evolved. Schultz acknowledged that at the beginning, his character was mainly like very flippant, but through time, he grew into be more kind. He was a gentler hero that now most of us are familiar with. In 1971, so this is a couple years before the Thanksgiving special, but 20 years, 21 years into him, Charlie Brown being around, Schultz said, I used to say he tried too hard and that he wanted everyone to like him too much, but I've grown away from that. I also think that when you look at Charlie Brown, you can see some of these personality traits that are just long lasting hallmarks, things that we just automatically think of when we think of Charlie Brown. A little bit of that insecurity, right? His perseverance in the face of immeasurable defeat, his constantly going to kick that football, right? I also think it's kind of fun to watch his interactions with girls, whether they be Lucy, who's kind of harassing him, to Peppermint Patty, all these different interactions he has, and that innate level of awkwardness, right? And we see that awkwardness right here on the screen. I want to show you one of the first images here from Charlie Brown. Now, this has to be within the first 2 months of the Peanuts. And I want you to take a minute, read the comic, and what is one thing that you see that's really missing here? Right? On the surface, it barely looks like the same characters. But you'll also notice that hallmark zigzag on Charlie Brown's shirt is missing, right? This is so significant. It arrived for the first time, the stripe on the shirt, the zigzag on his shirt, in December of 1950. So for all of the run of Charlie Brown, or all the run of the Peanuts, excuse me, except for the first 2 months, he has this iconic look, which is the zigzag. You'll also see that his head shape right here, it's so round and kind of egg shaped, and it evolves into being something that's very cartoonish still, but much more realistic. And he's not the only one that evolves, right? Here we go with Snoopy. So Snoopy on the right is who you see in the Thanksgiving special, but look at the Snoopies on the left. The 1952 one to the 1994, I mean, they're vastly different. When asked who changed the most, which character changed the most, Schultz responded that it was Snoopy. He drew Snoopy first as this puppy, who was a puppy both in outward appearance as well as his personality, right? In the earliest years of the Peanuts, Snoopy looked like a normal dog. He walked on four legs, he barked, he played catch. Over time, this Snoopy became increasingly humanistic, right? And Snoopy, he is not your average beagle, right? We know that he's a book lover. He writes books. He's a collector of fine art at one point, a root beer connoisseur. All of these things, I mean, I love my dog, but my dog is none of those. We also see Snoopy have other fun characteristics that might be a little bit kind of controversial, right? So he's a selfish, he's totally gluttonous, and he's lazy at times. And one thing that you will notice a lot is he constantly mocks Charlie Brown, his owner. But on the whole, he shows great love and loyalty to his owner. He lovingly calls him that round-headed kid, which I just think is really sweet. It's also kind of interesting, and I would love to go back and look at comic strips or rewatch some of these specials because Snoopy imagines himself to speak, but he never actually does speak. He makes nonverbal sounds. He sometimes says wolf, but his very articulate thoughts are often in the speech bubbles around him. So maybe next time you see a little Peanuts comic strip, you can look into that. So now it would not be a holiday without a little bit of controversy. So I'm going to take us through another clip really briefly, and I want you to look at this and kind of guess what the controversy may be. Did you miss it? You're like, you said controversy. I mean, I need more than that. Okay, let's watch it one more time, see if people pick up on it.
Are we going to have a prayer? It's Thanksgiving, you know. Before we're served, shouldn't we?
That's it, right? If you want me to play it a third time, I hear you. Because when I was doing my research
say
on this,
grace?
I was surprised. I couldn't quite figure out what this controversy was. But there was a controversy that arose in modern times, not in the original airing, about Franklin, who is the only Black character in the Peanuts, and how he is seated by himself on the opposite side of the table in this beach chair, and how that feels somewhat segregated from the other kids. So some viewers said this made them feel uncomfortable with how it was depicted, and thought that it was absolutely not accidental, that it was done on purpose. But Schultz's widow came back and said this absolutely wasn't racially motivated. I found what she said to be really interesting. She said that Jean, is her name, Jean Schultz, said her husband worked really hard to engage Franklin in the comics and the stories because he didn't have as many character quirks or personality traits that were as far developed as the other kids. So when he was writing this scene for Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, he wanted Franklin to have this actual kind of slapstick humor moment, and that's why he put him on the center of that side so he could fall out of the chair and everybody kind of just look over him in this very much kind of like clear on-screen gag action, right? The placement of Franklin by himself made it easier to animate this gag. Now, that kind of leads me to think about, well, Franklin, right? Franklin, why didn't Schultz give him this well-rounded kind of this character, all the characteristics that some of the other characters had? Franklin was newer to the Peanuts. He joined in 1968, and you see this woman in the center screen right here. Her name is Harriet Glickman. And 11 days after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., she sat down at her typewriter. She was a teacher raising 3 kids in suburban Los Angeles, and she wrote to the cartoonist. She said, "Hey, we need to do something. Please create a Black character for this comic strip so we can kind of help narrow this racial divide." Reaching out to Schultz saying, "Hey, I think that you can do this." And Schultz received it, right? And he did write back. He said he had considered the suggestion, but he wondered if creating a character like this, if Black parents might think it was condescending to their families, like it wasn't genuine. Now, Glickman, right here in the center, who is it's a photo with her and Marley Walker, who was the boy that voiced Franklin in the Peanuts movie. She did not give up. She said, let me bring people in from the Black community, and I want you to hear from them about how we could make this Black character relatable, which I think is really interesting, especially looking at it now, thinking that for many of us, we grew up with Franklin as part of this character, of this comic strip, and couldn't imagine him not being part of it. So by the next summer, Franklin debuted in the comic strip, but it was not without a fight. The company that syndicated the Peanuts to newspapers objected wholeheartedly to the idea of Franklin. And I love this response from Schultz. He reportedly delivered a very simple ultimatum. He said, either you run it the way I drew it, or I quit. And Schultz kept Franklin inside the comics. He was a character, a long-lasting character, but he never was developed as much of a nuanced character as some of the other Peanuts. And his widow, Jean, said that was because there just wasn't, he never felt like there was much support from him from the beginning. So he was trying to hold on to him so much. And now we're nearing the end of the presentation, right? And we see here, I want us to end today looking at the last part of this strip. And here we go.
Good grief, it's 4 o'clock. We're supposed to be at Grandmother's house for Thanksgiving by 4:30. I better talk to her and explain my dilemma. Hello? Grandma? This is Chuck. I mean Charlie Brown. We're gonna be a little late. You see, I invited a few friends over and they're still here. Well, it's just Linus and a girl named Marcy and a girl named Peppermint Patty. She's a great baseball player. And a boy named Franklin? No, ma'am, they haven't eaten. As a matter of fact, they've let me know that in no uncertain terms. What? You mean it?
Hey, Peppermint Patty, great news! We're all invited to Charlie Brown's grandmother's for Thanksgiving dinner.
I will end it there, right? Just as the comic began with unexpected and new guests being part of the Thanksgiving tradition, that's how it ended as well, with Charlie Brown's grandmother saying the more the merrier, or wah, 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 wah. Please come over. And so I kind of leave this with this fun, artful moment and encourage you to think about your own Thanksgiving traditions, whether you're spending them at the hospital this year with our patients, thank you so much. Whether you're spending it at home with family, with chosen family, with friends, or maybe a completely different, unexpected Thanksgiving. I hope that you're able to take this kind of joy for the start of the holiday season and carry it with you further, and encourage you to think about your own traditions and really taking hold of them, being proud of them, and moving them forward. So thank you so much for attending Artful Moments today. and have a wonderful, wonderful Thanksgiving break.